the dark history behind powdered wigs. You're walking through the opulent halls of Versailles in 1750. Everywhere you look, nobles wear towering white wigs that seem to defy gravity. They look elegant, sophisticated, refined. But what if I told you that beneath those pristine curls lies one of history's most horrifying secrets? A secret so dark, so disturbing, that when the truth finally came out, it sparked revolutions and toppled empires. Today, we're uncovering the sinister truth behind powdered wigs, a story of disease, death, exploitation, and human suffering that the aristocracy desperately tried to hide. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see those elegant portraits hanging in museums. This isn't just fashion history. This is a tale of horror hiding in plain sight. The year is 1665. London is being ravaged by the Great Plague. Bodies pile up in the streets. The wealthy flee to their country estates, but they bring something with them, something that will haunt European society for the next 150 years. King Charles II of England returns from exile in France with a new fashion, the periwig. But this wasn't just about style. This was about survival, or so they thought. The plague had left thousands bald from fever and disease. Syphilis, which was rampant among the nobility, caused hair to fall out in clumps. Smallpox scarred scalps and destroyed hairlines. The wealthy needed a solution that would hide their diseased, rotting scalps from public view. But here's the horrifying truth they didn't anticipate. Those beautiful wigs were made from the hair of plague victims. Hair merchants would sneak into plague houses and cut hair from the recently dead, often while families were still grieving. The very thing meant to hide disease was spreading it. And this was just the beginning of the nightmare. Behind the glamorous wig shops of Paris and London operated one of history's most ghoulish industries, the corpse hair trade. Professional hair collectors, known as cadaver barbers, worked in the dead of night. They would bribe morgue workers, church grave diggers, and hospital staff for access to fresh corpses. The best hair came from young women who had died suddenly, plague victims, accident victims, and execution victims. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Living people began selling their hair to survive. Desperate peasants, starving families, and imprisoned debtors would sell their hair for a few coins. Entire families would be left bald, humiliated, and marked as the desperate poor. The most prized hair came from children. Orphanages became hair farms, where children's heads were shaved monthly to supply the wig trade. These children never knew the feeling of hair on their heads. They were kept permanently bald to feed the vanity of the rich. Hair merchants would travel through plague-stricken villages with carts, offering bread in exchange for hair from the living and the dead. They became known as hair vultures, circling areas of human misery to profit from desperation. The business was so lucrative that entire criminal networks developed around hair theft. Gangs would kidnap people with beautiful hair, shave them bald, and sell them into slavery while profiting from their hair. Young women lived in constant fear of being targeted by hair thieves. But the horror of sourcing the hair was nothing compared to what happened during the wig-making process. Step inside a 17th century wig workshop, and you'd immediately smell death. The stench of rotting hair mixed with chemicals was so overwhelming that wig makers had the shortest life expectancy of any craftsman in Europe. The hair had to be cleaned with lye so strong would burn through skin. Workers' hands were permanently scarred and deformed from handling the caustic chemicals. Many went blind from the fumes. The cleaning process often took months because the hair carried diseases that were nearly impossible to eliminate. But the real killer was the powder, that pristine white coating that made wigs look so elegant. It was made from lead, mercury, and arsenic. Wig makers would spend 12-hour days breathing these deadly chemicals. Most died of heavy metal poisoning before age 40. Here's something that will shock you. Wig workshops were built next to cemeteries not for convenience, but because so many workers died that they needed quick access to burial grounds. Some wig-making districts had a morgue on every street corner. The powder itself was prepared in hellish conditions. Workers would grind lead paint, mercury compounds, and arsenic into fine dust while wearing primitive cloth masks that provided no real protection. The powder rooms were literally death chambers where workers slowly poisoned themselves for wages. Master wig makers closely guarded their powder recipes, not because they were trade secrets, but because they knew how deadly they were. Apprentices who learned the true ingredients often died mysteriously or disappeared entirely. And the people wearing these wigs, they had no idea they were slowly poisoning themselves. Every morning, European nobles would dust their wigs with powder containing enough poison to kill a horse. They breathed it. It settled on their food. It absorbed through their skin. The very symbol of their status was systematically murdering them. The symptoms started subtly. Memory loss, tremors, mood swings. The French court at Versailles became notorious for erratic behavior. But it wasn't politics. It was lead poisoning. Nobles would forget conversations mid-sentence, fly into inexplicable rages, and suffer from hallucinations. Marie Antoinette's famous phrase, "Let them eat cake?" Modern historians believe she may never have said it. The quote appeared during a period when she was suffering severe mercury poisoning from her elaborate wigs. Her judgment was so impaired by heavy metal toxicity that she couldn't understand why people were starving. King George III of England, famous for his madness, his symptoms perfectly match arsenic poisoning from his powdered wigs. The Mad King wasn't mentally ill. He was being slowly murdered by his fashion choices. But here's the most disturbing part. Court physicians knew. They wrote detailed reports about the White Death affecting the nobility, but they were silenced by the Wigmakers Guild, which had become one of the most powerful organizations in Europe. Entire royal bloodlines showed signs of systematic poisoning. Birth defects increased, infant mortality soared, and mental illness became epidemic among the nobility. But instead of questioning their wigs, they blamed it on divine punishment or cursed bloodlines. and the wigs themselves became breeding grounds for horrors beyond imagination. Imagine wearing a hat that you never take off, ever, for months at a time. Now imagine that hat is made from dead people's hair, coated with poison, and sitting on your scalp in the heat of summer. Powdered wigs became ecosystems of horror. Lice, fleas, and rats would nest in the elaborate structures. Some wigs were so tall and complex that mice would build entire colonies inside them. Nobles would feel creatures moving around their heads during important ceremonies, but couldn't remove their wigs without losing face. The smell was indescribable. Rotting hair, dead insects, human waste, because wigs were so elaborate that wearers couldn't properly clean their scalps, and the sickening sweet smell of decomposing powder created an odor so foul that perfume had to be applied by the bottle. French nobles would faint during long court ceremonies, not from the heat, but from the toxic fumes rising from their own wigs. Some developed open sores on their scalps that never healed because the poisonous powder prevented proper healing. Here's the most nauseating fact. When wigs were finally removed for cleaning, they often contained the mummified remains of small animals that had crawled inside and died. Wig servants developed a specialized tool called a corpse rake to remove dead creatures from elaborate hairstyles. Some nobles' wigs became so infested that they would hire professional wig cleaners who specialized in removing vermin. These workers often died from infections contracted while cleaning the diseased hairpieces. But the personal suffering was nothing compared to the societal nightmare these wigs created. By 1750, the wig industry controlled European society in ways that would make modern conspiracy theorists shudder. Wig makers had become so powerful that they influenced laws, controlled trade routes, and even decided military campaigns. Here's something historians have tried to hide. Major European wars were partly fought over access to hair. The 7 Years' War included battles specifically to control regions where the best wig hair could be harvested. Thousands died so that nobles could maintain their elaborate hairstyles. The Wig Makers Guild operated like a secret society. They had spies in every court, blackmailed nobles with knowledge of their scalp diseases, and controlled information about the poisonous effects of their products. Anyone who spoke out against wigs mysteriously disappeared or died of sudden illness. But here's the most shocking conspiracy. They deliberately created new wig styles that required more hair, more powder, and more maintenance. Each new fashion wasn't about beauty. It was about increasing profits from human suffering. The guild kept detailed records of their human suppliers. They had contracts with executioners across Europe, monopolies on orphanage hair, and even agreements with plague hospitals. They literally profited from every form of human misery. They also controlled the medical profession's response to wig-related illnesses, bribing doctors to diagnose poisoning symptoms as other diseases and funding research that would obscure the connection between wigs and death. And when people finally discovered the truth, the results were explosive. By 1780, the evidence could no longer be hidden. Doctors across Europe began publishing reports about the wig plague that was killing the aristocracy. The connection between powdered wigs and insanity, disease, and death became undeniable. But it wasn't medical evidence that ended the wig era. It was revolution. When French peasants stormed the Bastille, one of their first acts was to burn every wig they could find. They had watched their children's hair stolen, their families poisoned by wig-making chemicals, and their loved ones die from diseases spread by corpse hair. The symbolic power was overwhelming. Cutting off a noble's wig wasn't just removing their hair, it was exposing their rotting, diseased scalp to the world. It was revealing the literal corruption beneath their artificial beauty. Here's something that will amaze you. The guillotine was partly designed to efficiently remove elaborate wigs along with heads. The executioners had become frustrated with trying to behead people whose wigs were so tall and complex that they interfered with the blade. But the most poetic justice? Many of the wig makers who had profited from human misery ended up having their own hair harvested for the very wigs they had created. Revolutionary pamphlets of the time specifically called wigs monuments to murder and crowns of corruption. The fall of the wig became synonymous with the fall of the old aristocratic order. The powdered wig era officially ended around 1800, but its impact echoes through history in ways most people never realize. The phrase bigwig comes directly from this period, referring to people whose social status was literally built on the suffering of others. The expression, "don't flip your wig," originated from the embarrassment of having your artificial hair fall off and revealing your diseased scalp. But here's the most disturbing parallel. We're still doing it. Modern fashion industries still exploit the desperate, still hide the true costs of beauty, and still poison people in the name of status. Those elegant portraits we admire in museums, we're looking at people who were slowly dying from vanity, wearing the hair of the dead, and breathing poison for the sake of appearance. Every powdered wig represents someone who suffered, someone who died, someone who was exploited. The most horrifying fact about powdered wigs isn't that they were made from corpse hair, or that they were coated with poison, or that they spread disease. It's that everyone knew. The nobles knew they were wearing dead people's hair. They knew the powder was poisonous. They knew people were dying to supply their vanity, and they kept wearing them anyway. The dark history of powdered wigs isn't just about fashion. It's about what people will do to maintain power, status, and the illusion of superiority. It's about how far humans will go to avoid showing their true selves to the world. The next time you see a portrait of an 18th century noble with their pristine white wig, remember, you're not looking at elegance or sophistication. You're looking at a monument to human suffering, built on the bodies of the desperate and maintained through willful ignorance of its true cost. The powdered wig wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a symbol of everything that was rotten in the old world. And when it finally fell, it took entire empires with it.